Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for coming to celebrate the life of Mark Kennedy. The number of people in this room is a real testament to how much Mark was loved. The Board of Directors of Origami USA awarded the Michael Schau Volunteer Recognition Award to Mark, and a tribute was read to him shortly before he passed away. An excerpt is in your program, and I'm not going to read it today because it's also in the fold and the paper, and if you'd like a copy, just let me know. So instead, I'll open up with a very short anecdote about Mark. Mark was one of the very first people I met at Origami USA, of course, in the late 1980s. And at the time, I was newly married and I went on a vacation with my husband, and I brought tons of origami paper with me on vacation because I was really determined to make a 90-piece Sanabe modular, but I just couldn't manage to do it. So as soon as I got home from my vacation, I called Mark and he answered the phone. "Origami hotline, what fold can I help you with?" And I was a little taken aback, but I was like, okay, yes, this is what I called for. And of course, Mark explained it to me clearly, and in no time I had my 90-piece modular, which I still have today. So without further delay, I would like to introduce the first speaker of this morning, Jan Polish.
Hi, everyone. As I was writing this, thoughts of Mark and my life kept piling up. But I knew I couldn't ramble on forever, so I'll try to tell you about just a few of them. When I joined the Friends in 1984 or 5, the regular meetings at Lillian Oppenheimer's apartment had moved to the museum. My first time at Folding Wednesday, and it was Folding Wednesday then, I felt that I had just walked into the middle of a movie where everyone else had been there since the beginning. I barely folded, and Michael Schau, Alice Gray, and Lillian Oppenheimer intimidated me. They were famous in this small world, and they were fabulous. I wasn't really very comfortable. And then I met Mark, who caught me up on the beginning of the movie. He was the opposite of intimidating. He was so open, friendly, kind, and welcoming. He met you and you were his friend. And he helped me make other lifelong friends too. I got to know Jean Baden Gillette when Mark suggested, kind of strongly, that we share a tent at the Clearwater Festival, where he organized a bunch of us to teach origami all day. Then we spent sleepless nights in the tents, listening to those in the other tents not trying to sleep. Clearwater ended after the year where heat stroke threatened us in 98 degrees and high humidity. And then I got to know Ruth Ann Bestman when Mark taught us both John Montrell's Stegosaurus. He was infinitely patient with us, which definitely bonded us. And he was a wonderful teacher. Late one night at a house party, when I was very relaxed and actually rather lubricated, he taught me the Mayakawa demon, something I've never been able to recreate. But I taught him what happened when someone touched the model I was folding. Because it was stuck in my head that if someone else made a single fold on my model, it wasn't mine anymore. He reached for my model and I hit him. Not a little tap, mind you. I hit him. I was immediately embarrassed and mortified by my overly enthusiastic response, but he took it well. He never touched another model of mine again, and he was quick to warn others, laughing, what would happen to them if they did the same. But with all Mark's friends, he always seemed a little lonely. One year, he dated a few women, mostly people he met at science fiction conventions, but nothing seemed to stick. And then he met Arlene. and his loneliness was over. Arlene reminded me recently that I warned her when they started dating that he was our friend and we loved him, and she'd better treat him well. She certainly did. And he was happy because now he had love and now he had a family. We spent many New Year's Eves together with some friends. One year, Kathleen O'Regan taught us all to eat fire, which we should do at the next convention. Yes, there is a trick to it, but it's still scary that first time. When it was Mark's turn, he was worried that fire and his beard would not interact well. So we all stood around him with wet towels, just in case. They weren't necessary, thank goodness, and we all felt better. We all felt that after overcoming our fears to eat fire, we'd be able to cope with anything the new year brought. For years, Mark and I co-chaired the business committee. Mark always brought wonderful books and papers that he had found in local stores, online, or at one of the many overseas conventions that he and Arlene attended. And at every convention, he gave out hundreds of pins and magnets. In fact, if I was going to a convention that Mark was not attending, I knew to leave room in my luggage for boxes of Mark Kennedy pins to distribute. So I knew Mark for a long time, over 30 years. How lucky I was. How lucky I am. I've never known another person so open, so full of heart, so dedicated to his family and to his friends, so dedicated to sharing origami, or so universally loved. I will remember him always, our Mark with the big smile and the even bigger heart.
Thank you, Jan. And now, Gay Merrill Gross.
Hi everyone, thank you so much Wendy and the board of Origami USA and the museum for organizing, hosting this today. If I were asked to describe Mark Kennedy in one word, I would say beloved. In 2 words, amnh. Also 2 words, a giver, but I would qualify that. In the early 1990s, Origami USA lost its 3 co-founders, Lillian Oppenheimer, Michael Schall, and Alice Gray. And in 1994, we gathered here for a memorial for Alice Gray, and I never forget, somebody described her as an equal opportunity giver. And that's exactly what Mark was. You didn't have to be someone special for Mark to give you special treatment. I was really happy when I got an email from Faye saying that the board of Origami USA had awarded him the Michael Schall Volunteer Award, and Faye got to read to him what Jan and the board had written, which I thought really, really captured his spirit and was very comprehensive in how it described all of his contributions. But I did want to mention one that was left out. When Jan Polish and Kathleen O'Regan were co-editors of our magazine, Mark was the diagrams editor, and he made it his mission to find models that would be of great appeal and almost anyone could do. And if he couldn't get diagrams for it, he diagrammed it himself, which is a lot of work. I'd like to tell you about what for me is Mark's greatest gift. Those of you who do origami and have been to a lot of folding events and conventions may have noticed that sometimes a child or an adult may come and they're very enthusiastic, and it may last for a little bit, and then especially with kids, they may move on to other things, other interests. They don't have the time anymore. So In 1990, a woman came to some origami meetings and events with her 2 young children. And as often happens, the children's interest waned. And so the mother may have also lost her interest in origami too. But luckily, Mark recognized in this woman a big heart as big as hers, as his. And when he married her, she had no choice but to be a lifelong folder. And everything I said about Mark is true of Arlene as well. Beloved, a mensch, whatever the female version of that is, and an equal opportunity giver. And for me, that was Mark's greatest gift of bringing Arlene also into my life. One of the things they mentioned in the volunteer award was how Mark always liked to tell corny jokes to kids when he was teaching. He always wanted to do something to make people happy. And 3 and 4-year-olds really can't fold, they don't get jokes, so he had a secret weapon. You probably saw a picture of it earlier, where he would poke a little kid in the stomach or the shoulder and make them body squeak. So when Jan had the idea of posting photos and remembrances and messages to Mark via email, and Rachel made it into a blog, I wrote a little poem. So in Washington, they have somebody known as the Speaker of the House. I'd like to tell you about Mark Kennedy, the Squeaker of the House. Mark has the magic touch. He touches a kid's tummy and it squeaks so much. It's as if hiding inside is a little squeaky mouse. That's what makes Mark the Squeaker of the House. From someone who never ceases to be amazed by your joy in bringing delight to others. Yay. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gay. Okay, and the next, wait, Gay, I think you took my program. Okay, the next speaker is Ariella Borad, who is speaking on behalf of her mother, Ruth Ann Bestman.
Hi, my name is Ariella. Before I read what my mother has written, I just wanted to say, in response to what Gay said, I was one of the little kids who grew up around Mark, and I can vouch for the squeak that he really, it was embarrassing, but it was, of course, out of love. And my mother, Ruth Ann Bestman, is unable to be here today and has asked me to read the following on her behalf. Dear USA friends, if we are lucky, we might experience moments that are truly life-changing. For me, the summer of 1987 was pure magic. By a series of events, I found out about the Friends of the Origami Center of America. Michael Schall took me under his wing and introduced me to a new group of friends that to this day are like family. I was a self-taught folder with a limited repertoire. It was Mark who willingly made time to teach me the basics and then gradually challenged me to fold more complex models. We would get together on weekends and at the museum Wednesday evenings for the volunteer meetup group, and as we folded, we talked about all kinds of subjects. One Wednesday evening after volunteering, a handful of us stayed behind when Mark decided to teach John Montroll's Stegosaurus. This folding session lasted way into the night. I don't think we left until after 3:30 in the morning. We were exhausted and dazed, but happy and fulfilled with our accomplishments. I still have that model. After I returned home to Madison, Wisconsin, we kept in touch regularly, and Mark would often send me diagrams and paper. When I started my new job as the producer of the National Public Radio show What Do You Know, Mark would frequently offer articles of interest and trivia that he thought might be useful show content. When my daughter was born, Mark took on the role of surrogate uncle. He would send gifts like Disney movies that Ariella loved receiving. One time in return, I sent him a keychain of a pig pooping and said it was from Ariella, although she had no idea that I had done this. In response, Mark sent a big box to the wrong mailing address, my mother's home. She mistakenly opened it and then immediately called me after seeing the contents. Mark had included every kind of farting toy he could find, from a large clock for the wall that tooted every hour on the hour to the whoopee cushion and everything in between. For a long time after that, Ariella and I would try to find funny, crude gag toys for Mark, and he would continue to try to outdo us. It became either a competition or an obsession. I really don't know. When Ariella was 5 years old, we visited Mark and Arlene. They took us to Hershey Park and the Crayola factory. And during the drive, we listened to Harry Potter on tape. It was our first introduction to Harry's world, and we were immediately hooked. Over the years, we called each other often, and during every call, Mark would tell Ariella jokes. When she moved to New York City to attend the Mannes School of Music, Mark and Arlene would drive all the way from Allentown, Pennsylvania, to her piano recitals and performances. Mark gave me what is still today my favorite origami tool, the stainless steel 3-in-1 smoker's pipe tool and knife. I would be lost without it. Witty and funny as Mark was, he was also very thoughtful. When I went to conventions in Japan and Israel, he would send me with a box filled with literally dozens of his pins to share with other folders. Another example of Mark's giving was his express mailing a box full of hundreds of folding tools for the participants of Madison's large public origami installations. I am overcome with a deep sense of loss and sadness. But throughout these many weeks of reflecting on my long friendship with Mark, a feeling of immense gratitude emerges. I look around my home and see Mark everywhere. His refrigerator magnets, his pins, his origami dragons. All are treasures that bring comfort, knowing that he is still a very important part of my life. Arlene, I have enormous admiration for your strength and determination during Mark's illness and his treatments, and how you kept us informed about his situation. I have often told people that Mark was the most generous person I ever met. You share that same quality. You are a gem, and your friendship I treasure. I send much love to you, Rachel, and Jacob. I am reminded of this quote from Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, when Dumbledore says to Harry, "Those we love never truly leave us. There are things that death cannot touch." Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ariella. Faye Goldman is the next speaker.
Little bit of history, because other people have given how they met Mark and Arlene. I met them over 20 years ago at an Origami USA convention. They lived in Allentown. I lived in Philadelphia, not very far away. I was invited to their house for their monthly meeting. I was so excited. The next month, I brought my folding husband because somebody had more paper than I did. We went to many conventions together: Mexico, Germany, recent Peacocks, Origami Heaven, and of course Origami USA. We were suite mates at Origami USA conventions for many, many years. Last year at Stratford-upon-Avon, we celebrated the BOS 50th together, shortly before he was diagnosed, and it will always be an important memory for me. I have tried to share origami as Mark did. I run my origami meetings much like he does, much like he and Arlene did. Lots of sharing and learning, not much forcing people to fold. I have never found anyone with the memory that Mark had. I once asked him if he knew of any easy origami dinosaurs, sort of an oxymoron, but I needed some for a public session. I was teaching a public session shortly afterwards and needed some. He spent 3 hours showing me one dinosaur after another. No books, no diagrams, just his memory. And it was like 3 hours. He was an ideal teacher. He was always loved by children. When my daughter was about 8, She didn't want me to collect any more origami books. She thought I had enough. I still collected. But we were at a mall one day, and I saw the latest page-a-day calendar. She didn't want me to have it. She didn't want me to waste time. I then looked at the back, and I saw Mark's name was on the back as a contributor. I showed it to her, and now it was okay for me to buy the book. But Mark was more than just origami. He was funny, smart, loved children and all people, and he had a gentle soul. My aforementioned non-folding husband kept coming to the monthly Allentown meetings because he enjoyed being with Mark. He will be missed by all of us.
Thanks, Faye. Now I have a couple of videos I'm going to show. We had Miri Golan and Nick Robinson and Tomoko Fuse each sent in a video. So I'm going to start with the one from Miri. Okay.
Darling, hello all my origami friends. Today's a special day for Mark, the kind Mark. Wherever Mark goes, everybody is around him, special children. There is a two form of life we live, the way we think we live as we want, and the way we live ourselves with people's mind and heart. And Mark will stay in many, many people's heart with all of his kindness, all of his brooches, and a big hamburger. Thank you.
That was sent to me yesterday by Miri. And this is from Nick Robinson.
Hi, I'm Nick Robinson. Wendy asked me if I'd like to record a short video for Mark's ceremony. What to say? It's so difficult for all of us, isn't it? I've known Mark since the, I guess, mid-80s, when I joined an organisation called Fold, which had a number of origami luminaries like Michael Foss and Robert Lang and James Sakoda, David Lister, Mark Kennedy, and I was very much the new kid on the block. And Mark was just, he just became a friend so quickly. He was generous, thoughtful, considerate. I don't think in all the years I've ever heard him give anyone bad press or slag anybody or be nasty to anybody. He's just, his capacity for kindness was just massive. I fished out one of the old Fold things. I've still got them all somewhere. This was the page that, one of the many pages that Mark sent, and we really got to know each other through this publication. And then we started writing. This is, of course, before the days of internet, which kind of makes you feel rather old these days. And I used to get regular parcels from him. He sent me books by John Montrell. After the first 2 or 3, I said, "It's really kind, Mark, but it's not quite my thing." And he says, "Well, I'll keep sending them, and maybe it will become your thing." And he had John sign them all for me. So many just random gifts and generous acts that he made, it's hard to say. I remember one particular funny one. I received an envelope which I opened it, and it contained a parcel of live rattlesnake eggs, a little envelope. And it said, "Caution, do not raise above 5 degrees centigrade or hatching may take place." So I shook the envelope and there was some rattling going on in there, and I opened the end of it, and it jumped up and down and made this extraordinary sound. It was a washer wrapped around a rubber band, and it went off, and I nearly wet myself. I was shaking for about 5 minutes, and I could just imagine his face on the other end of the Atlantic, just enjoying these little moments of fun. I'll keep this short, I'm sure. Lots of people want to say a few words, but he was like a brother. He was like an American brother to me, and I'll miss him a great deal. And my thoughts are with Arlene and the other members of his family. But let's not make this a depressing event. We're celebrating his life, and what an amazing life it was. So Mark, maybe I'll see you again one day, and take care, my friend.
Okay, and now Tomoko Fusei. I happened to be with her in Japan, and I was able to record this.
Hi, I'm Tomoko Fusei. I'm so sad to hear the Mark Kennedy passed. Anyway, hi, Mark. Are you fine? I'm fine too. Because you are still living in my heart. So people who meet you, all people are the same feeling as me. Sometimes you give me a lot of pins. I presented my friends, and everybody is very surprised. And it's a very joyful moment to give his present to my friends. And sometimes I am very surprised his play, surprise play, trick play. So we are very, very, anytime I am very surprised, so everybody is laughing. So everybody know what he showed me, and I know, of course, everybody, all team is act and actress, and we are laughing all together. Anytime you are like a warm, how to say, warm sun, no, warm sunlight. Everybody become very warm heart. So, Mark, you are still living here. Wow.
And that was Tomoko Fusei. And we also received a letter from Jonathan Baxter and a box of squeakers. Jonathan thought we could make like a song with a squeaker chorus, so I don't know, maybe we'll give that a shot at convention. So now I'm going to read a letter from Jonathan Baxter. Mark Kennedy from New Jersey in New York City for the evening to attend a meeting of the Friends of the Origami Center of America. That's 35 years ago, and that's how long he has been my friend, because it didn't take long after arriving at the first floor residence of Lillian Oppenheimer, founder of FOCA, to be introduced. From that point on, life is peppered with many meetings, conventions, festivals, and other national and international origami events of note where our friendship grew. When I think back on this time, I cannot help admiring Mark's great sense of ambassadorship. He practically lived, slept, and ate origami. He instinctively knew how to share it in any situation. I once commented to him that I started the Origami Festival so he would have another event to go to. Later, I realized that wasn't quite right. Mark was already an origami festival. The fancy waistcoats, the hats covered in buttons, the bag with all the papers and latest must-see origami magazines, the boxes filled with buttons and earrings and fridge magnets. He was a walking one-man origami event. He was also part mad scientist. Who can forget all the weird concoctions he came up with to coat finished pieces? The skin peeling off his hands before he realized that particular recipe required wearing gloves. The wet folded wallpaper creations, the techniques he pioneered for inking papers, and the stunning patterns he was able to create as a result of this experimentation. At any convention, you could guarantee to find him well ensconced in the late night folding sessions. Often one of the last to leave, he'd be teaching or sharing tips and techniques well into the wee hours until the last of the enthusiasts could take it no more. Next morning, he'd be there in line, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, waiting to register for classes, typically teaching a model or variation to those about him. His generosity was legendary. Who here has not benefited from his kindness? The number of people of all ages first turned on to the paper folding arts by Mark is vast. Today, the origami world is poorer with Mark's passing. We can only pick up from where he left off and strive to embody the spirit of sharing as practiced by him. As for those other Kennedys, never did meet them. All I can say is they have one heck of a job to live up to the Kennedy name after Mark's contribution. Jonathan Baxter, March 2018.
In moments like this, words do not come easy, and it's hard for me. Mark is gone. Is it true? No, I don't believe so. Those like him who shared their great generosity and love for origami, their sense of humor and availability remain forever in the hearts of those who were lucky enough to meet him. He gave me something that goes beyond, he gave me something that goes beyond sharing the love of origami art. He gave me his real friendship, a friendship that lasted almost 30 years and that had turned into fraternal affection. With him, I shared many moments of my life at origami conventions, at my house, when he came to visit me, and often at the computer over Skype. I miss Mark now and will always miss him. Rest in peace, my dear friend, and thank you for sharing part of your life with mine. Alfredo Genta. And then I have a few things to say. I first met Mark in 1990 when he was doing what he always did when he saw kids in a public place. I'm not sure he had yet discovered squeakers, so thankfully he didn't squeak my brother and me. Instead, he threw origami darts at us, maybe balloons, paper airplanes. I don't think he even noticed my mom at that point. I honestly got a little annoyed by this weird guy throwing in a vest who wouldn't stop throwing things at me, so I kept making excuses to leave the room. Shortly after that, he started showing up at the house, bringing us toys, soda, other treats. Well, maybe some of those things were for my mom, but Jacob and I enjoyed them too. Soon after that, we all moved together to Allentown. We definitely had our disagreements as we grew to be a family, but Mark was a great parent. He taught me that a life's passion and how one earned an income didn't necessarily have to be the same or tied. That said, he did teach me to be intellectually curious and to take my work seriously. I admired how he spent full work days reading, researching, gathering knowledge, and his days as a research editor for the Exporter's Encyclopedia. He spent his work life reading newspapers from around the world that would and would always come home with pink clippings from the Financial Times, printouts from Reuters, and other articles he thought I'd like to read. I learned so much from his happening upon information and sharing it with me in the way that we all take for granted now in the internet era. Growing up, I remember so many Sundays, and Saturdays, Mark spent sitting in the basement, folding origami while watching TV or listening to the radio. And only in writing this did it dawn on me how many sunny days I've spent in windowless rooms by myself, making objects that serve no functional purpose. And through this realization, I've come to appreciate what a guiding force Mark had been on my creative life. He taught me that sitting alone in a room making funny objects is inherently valuable. It's a personally nourishing exercise through which meaningful and powerful international communities are built that accomplish important and amazing things. A few things both he and my mom have in common, besides origami, that I've learned tremendously from include how to be generally non-judgmental, inclusive and welcoming, maybe even too much at times. They are both such patient and generous people in how they are accessible to teach, organize origami functions, and be present and available for family and friends. Mark always gave away models he made, always thinking about people when shopping, surprising them with gifts, sometimes too much. I often regretted telling Mark I liked a particular food because then I'd end up with way too much of it. I loved the John Waters movie Cry Baby when I was a kid, and as an adult, he bought me a DVD copy of it, and then a few years later, another copy. There are many life events I wish I could still share with him, and it's been sad that it's taken Mark's passing to come to some of these realizations. If he were here, I think he'd be sitting in the back folding balloon animals for any of the kids that are here, or just folding origami. Thank you, Mark. You've been a profoundly influential force in my life.
A lot about Mark Kennedy, the master folder, the master teacher, the master squeaker, but that's not the Mark Kennedy I want to talk about. I want to talk about Mark Kennedy, the really groovy teenager, because that's the Mark Kennedy I first met. In high school, I and my teenage friends were very awkward, and we that if we were in large groups, somehow we were a little less awkward. During one of these group activities, one of our friends, Susie, invited this kid that she met at an ecumenical council youth group. The kid she invited was Mark Kennedy. And Mark Kennedy was really cool. And I mean really, really cool. We were amazed. Everybody immediately liked him. He was full of corny jokes even back then, but more importantly, he was full of wonderful stories about what it was like to start college, because he wasn't even in high school. He was a college student, and he didn't come from our town. He came from 5 towns over, but everybody loved him, and everybody immediately thought of him as an older brother. So every other activity from then on, we'd always invite Mark. He wasn't able to come that often, but he tried to do so whenever he could. He and I immediately bonded. He kind of took me under his wing and helped me socialize. He had me join his ecumenical council youth group, and we'd go places together. And he would come to every one of my high school shows. He even came to my high school graduation. Even then, Mark Kennedy did origami, and I thought that was very, very cool. So I searched all the local libraries trying to find a book on origami. They always had one, but it had the same 5 patterns in it, and I wanted something a little better. So in one library about 2 towns over. I found a very large, very dusty book. Turns out I was only the second person who had ever taken that book out of that library. Turns out the first person who took it out was Mark Kennedy. I should have just asked him to begin with. But when I moved away to college and then to grad school and then started working, I never lost touch with Mark. He was always calling me, inviting me to do things with him, inviting me to some activity or concert or Shakespeare in the Park, and I always came. I got involved in science fiction fandom and went to conventions, and he started going to conventions too. And matter of fact, for years and years, every year we'd have a joint birthday party where we'd, at a science fiction convention, where we'd throw a big party for both of our friends. At one point, my parents needed a house sitter, and Mark very generously moved into our house. At that point, my grandmother thought that since he was living in the house, he must have been a member of the family, and if he was a member of the family, he had to learn to be Jewish. So one day when he was the only one home, she came and she spent the whole day teaching him all her top secret Jewish recipes. Things she had never shared with anybody else. But in her mind, if he could cook Jewish, he was Jewish. Once at a science fiction convention, I was smitten by a wonderful girl there I met. Unfortunately, she lived in a completely different state. I lived in Pennsylvania at the time. She lived in New York. So I contacted Mark, and we talked about ways that I could maybe keep the connection going. He went out immediately and found her and basically set up our first date together without even asking me. And of course, when I married her, he was the best man. And one Christmas, Kathy was pregnant. We were going to have our daughter Miranda pretty soon, and I was going to spend the entire Christmas vacation cooking things and making huge amounts of food so there'd be lots of leftovers for when the baby came. Unfortunately, when I got home from all my shopping mountains of food, just a second, there we go. From mountains of food, I got the call that Kathy was in the hospital and she was going to deliver 1 month early. So the first person I called was Mark and said, "Do you want a free 18-pound turkey?" Then I rushed to the hospital. He came over, he took the turkey and other perishables, and he put away the other food, which was nice. But when we got home with Miranda, right kind of on Christmas Day, it turned out he had decorated the entire apartment for Christmas, and even got us a Christmas tree, which he had decorated with folded origami ornaments. Those ornaments we keep very carefully, and we put them on our Christmas tree every single year. So I have talked a lot about me, kind of more than I've talked about Mark, but when I think back on my life has always had a Mark in it. Even though we haven't lived close, we almost never lived in the same state, but everything I've done and every important part of my life has always been something that I did with Mark. So now my life always had a Mark in it, and at least I believe that it still does. Thank you.
Thank you, Rolly. That was really nice to hear about Mark's early days. And now Mark's sister, Janet Kennedy, and his brother, Bruce Kennedy.
Hi, I'm Janet Kennedy. I'm Mark's sister, and Bruce.
And brother Bruce, little brother, baby boy.
Okay, I was going to say that later.
You always say that too. Baby of the family.
There were four of us Kennedy kids growing up. Mark was the oldest, then me. We had a brother in between who drowned 11 years ago, and then my baby brother, Bruce. Yeah, we're here to confirm most of the things that you said about him as well. I think he's probably the most generous person I've ever known in my whole life. Really easygoing, to the point of almost laziness maybe, as a kid. Didn't like to make his bed. Very intelligent, definitely very curious. I think that fit with the job he ended up in the end doing research with Dun and Bradstreet. He always loved TV, reading, books. Books were everywhere, piled up, and cowboy boots. I think my very first memory of him as a toddler was cowboy boots. I don't know that I ever
No photographs of him. It was a little man in the 50s with the cowboy and the guns and the boots.
And he always hated broccoli. In fact, that's the only fight I remember he ever had with my parents, was over broccoli. He refused to eat it. So when we were little, we moved every 2 years. We started out in a little house in Ohio where we had bunk beds and then a trundle bed, which I'm not even sure people know what that is now, but it was a little bed that slid under the bunk beds, and that was mine. So I shared a room with my brothers. You were the baby in the crib. And we would pull out the trundle bed, and Mark would always jump on me because he thought that was very funny. That was how he'd wake me up. Then we moved to a bigger house, and I loved that house. It was actually a 2-family house, and Mark and I had the whole upstairs to ourselves. And we used to sneak in and play cards in the middle of the night just because we could, because my parents weren't on the same floor and they didn't know. That was nice. That was the old days when kids used to play outside all day, and we always played hide and go seek out there. We had a big sandbox that my parents actually had a dump truck, that they brought a whole dump truck worth of sand, and everybody would come and play with us. And he and I used to fight over, we had a slide underneath these apple trees, and the apple blossoms in the spring would fall down on the slide, and we would fight each other to be the one to go down and slide down the slide and push all the blossoms out. Then we moved to Chicago into a little house, and the thing I remember doing with them there was, the wind in Chicago is as bad as they say, and you were still probably too little, but we used to take a raincoat, and if you spread it out, you could actually fly. It would blow you backwards and up in the air, and I'm sure we thought we were flying, far, far away. It was probably like 6 inches, but that was really fun. And let me see, then we moved to Tarrytown. So my father got a promotion, and he thought he had a raise until he looked at housing in New York and found out it was not. So we actually ended up in an apartment upstate in Tarrytown. And that was tough because there wasn't much to do there. It was a little tiny apartment. And so you go outside. We grew up playing outside. But the people who owned the apartment building didn't want kids on any of the grass. So I remember getting chased everywhere, and there was nothing to do. Other than across the street, there were woods. And if you went up, there was an abandoned mansion that Mark always told me was full of playboys. I didn't verify that, but...
I was told there were alligators in the basement, stay away.
But that was where I learned origami. I think my parents figured out there was nothing to do, and somehow managed to hook Mark up with origami, and he never looked back. That was pretty much all he did after that. So then we moved to Jersey, Raleigh. I remember, Mark, any money he talked about was always Raleigh, so it's really good to see you again after all this time. When he had to go to college, he picked Grove City. Talk about the easygoing to the point of maybe laziness. That was where my mom went, and it was really easy because he just was a legacy. He didn't have to do a lot of paperwork, so he went there even though it really probably wasn't a great match for him. They made him go to chapel every day. I don't think he particularly cared for that. But one of my special memories is I wrote a play in college, and he actually produced it. He took a class in production and actually produced my play. So that was pretty special. So what did we learn? Mark and I both. Because I've already talked to Bruce, you don't remember moving as much as Mark and I did.
I had a different life. You stopped moving by the time I was age 5. So, no, I had a very different life. But my memories, well, yeah, everyone talks about his generosity, and that's, he was 8 years older, so I don't have a whole lot of memories, but always his desire to wanted to give you something or help you in some way. So that was there. I say that origami and Arlene were the best things that happened to him. Raleigh mentioned social awkwardness. Before he had origami or squeakers. Now and then we'd be in a restaurant and meet a friend of my mom's and he'd tell inappropriate dirty jokes. I remember at your wedding we went out to a diner at breakfast in the morning. He was trying to give something to a little girl across the table. But in origami, he found the perfect match for his skills and inclinations of generosity and teaching and connection with people and a way to give. I've just been very amazed and impressed that he was able to build a life out of origami, which has led him to meet a more, dare I say, more stable group of people rather than the sci-fi crowd, which he was very needed there, and that was partly why he was there. He had lots of friends and could help people out. He was a go-to person for a lot of the sci-fi crowds. And he built a life out of that. His sense of humor was always kind of provocative. I saw cleaning out my mom's house recently, a letter he wrote when he was 18 in Grove City, telling my sister he had nothing to tell her, was to the parents and anyways. And then my brother, Jay, I forget, was telling me to misbehave, and I think that's something to offer to tell people, misbehave. So there really was a little provocateur there, in there. And then I don't hear enough, but he was more intelligent and certainly well informed than he had occasion to share with I think what I assume in the origami crowd. So he was extremely knowledgeable and pretty intelligent. I owe a debt there in terms that he introduced me to Zen Buddhism in a way, indirectly. I think with Raleigh saying the ecumenical meetings. He knew so much about Zoroastrianism, the Bhagavad Gita, all these other religions. So then when I actually, at age 13, connected up with Buddhism, there was kind of a ground open there for me to not feel it was alien or anything. So I do remember Mark always on the ground, sitting on the floor. We had radiant heating in one of the houses I grew up in, folding his models. My brother Jay would sit on the ground and do his cartooning and editing and so forth. And then I became a Zen Buddhist, and I sit and do nothing. Either create or destroy. But he set up with that background for me. So thanks for being his friends and supporting, and there'd be no Mark Kennedy without all the origami community in Arlene.
Yes, I would like to echo that. Just saying, all the times we moved, there were a couple lessons I think that we learned as kids. One was not to care what other people think. And Mark was real good at that. He really didn't care. You learned how to just be true to yourself and your family and your friends, because ultimately that's all you have. When he was little, kids did pick on him. I was talking about that with Arlene. We moved a lot. He had all the characteristics that people like to pick on somebody for. He had bright red hair. We both had these crooked teeth that came in at a 90-degree angle. He had thick glasses. Very smart. People don't like very smart people. Kids don't like very smart people. And generous. And I don't think other kids understood that if you mentioned you like a candy bar, as Rachel said, he would come and bring you one or share his lunch, and people didn't get it. So they kind of picked on him, but in the end, I think what he learned is you don't care what other people think. And you go find who your family is and your people are, and you stay true to that. And besides our family, he developed 2 of his own, Arlene and Rachel and Jacob, and what a great family. And Arlene, you've been such a treasure. And you guys, all of you in the origami community, it's so great to see where he was really loved and fit. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Janet and Bruce. Now I'd like to call Jacob Gorchov. Thanks.
So I want to thank everyone for being here. Mark loved people. He loved being around people. You know, it didn't matter. He loved children, but it didn't matter who you were. I think when, as Rachel said, when when we met Mark, he was throwing darts at us in an auditorium. And then as we got to know him more and more, I would just go over to his house as a 8-year-old, 9-year-old, before we moved to Allentown. And it was great. Like, we just stayed up. I was folding at the time, and we would eat macaroni and cheese. And it was, he did everything that I wanted. He was always a generous person. I think everyone's been saying that, but I don't think I've met anyone as generous as Mark. You could ask for anything and he would give it to you. And he was always thinking about how he could make someone just satisfied and take care of them. And I think that, goes on to my mom and, that family as well. And he was a committed person. He found what he really enjoyed doing in life. And I think that's what we should all hope to have. And yeah, I love having known the whole Kennedy family as well. And yeah, it's great that this is happening here, because every year, if you don't know, it's they were very responsible for or they contributed. I'm not sure in recent years to the holiday tree that goes on here, and of course every month they had folding sessions here, and when we first met Mark, my mom, my sister, and myself were living in South Orange, New Jersey, and we would come up to New York quite often for various things that Mark would Mark and my mom would be doing for origami. And origami took him places and took Mom and my Mark places. And so anyway, I guess not to make this a sad experience, because I think everyone who's in this room had the pleasure of knowing Mark and had the same experiences with Mark, and we're gonna miss him. I'm gonna miss those times in Allentown when we would just be hanging out and he would be doing what he loved. And I think we can all take comfort in the fact that we know that he lived a great life and had great people around him that he took great care of. So thank you.
And now I'm inviting Elaine Gorchak.
See if I can do this. Oh, I actually miss hearing that squeaker and hearing the jokes. I can't believe it. So, thank you all for coming. We chose today for Mark's memorial because he facilitated Origami Sundays until he couldn't anymore. Today is also a sort of a potluck with food, since he asked that his memorial be a fold-in feed, which is a gathering that we have at our house twice a year. I will, of course, continue those, and we will all miss Mark at them, and we'll honor him at the next one as well. Mark got so much from all of you. He thrived on your laughs, your keen interest in learning, your attention, your listening. He was so generous, so caring, selfless, really, and you have been there to accept what he had to give. He didn't want to leave. He tried so hard to stay. He had so much more to do. It was a hard battle, not the one we expected. We expected that his muscle disorder would be the challenge, but things often don't happen as we want or expect them to. He was one of the most generous, loyal, and honest people I've ever known. When I first saw Mark, so you've heard some of this already, when I first saw Mark, he was sitting behind us in the annual members meeting at the 1990 convention in New York. I was with my children, age 7 and 10, when I saw a big kid with a backpack overflowing with paper. He kept putting origami models on their heads, and you heard about that. One that I remember was, I think it's Robert Neal's rocket ship, and Jacob was talking about that. Actually, later when we left, I saw him and I asked him to teach it to me, and he said, "I'm going to dinner now. I don't have time." But anyway, that was fine. I learned it later. It's okay. I didn't know that day how our lives would change. At that convention, I found out about a folding group called Paper Shapers, which was at Becky Berman's house in Teaneck, New Jersey. I was told, go to that group. Mark Kennedy goes there and he's really good. I went, and by December 1990, we were a couple. We traveled the world going to origami conventions, making friends all over, a new kind of universe. Mark was always giving and getting from all of you. You are my family, his family, whether by birth, through origami, science fiction, friendship. We are all joined forever through memories now of Mark. He is gone, and we will all miss him and rejoice in what he gave. And some of you may remember he would sometimes say, I want to be Peter Pan when I don't grow up. Thanks for being here. We'll all miss him. I will.
Okay, thanks so much, Arlene. Oh wait, Jacob. Okay. So we actually miraculously still have some time before Folding Sunday begins in the lunchrooms. If anyone else would like to speak and share their memories of Mark, you can either come to the stage, or we have some microphones that we can pass in the audience, and you can let us know what you prefer. So if you just raise your hand and let us know. Okay, Rachel, do you want to come up here?
No.
No? Okay.
It's not. It's short enough. Do you want to grab the microphone?
Hold on, wait. My videographer's coming.
I met Mark, I think before he met Arlene, because he so generously came to our Long Island Fold Fest. It was called a Fold Fest then, it's Origami Heaven now. And he always stopped in Manhattan and brought Lillian Oppenheimer with him. Lillian said to me one day, I like coming to your event. The children are always so well behaved. Well, why? They weren't running around because there was Mark right on the ground entertaining them. He would keep them entertained, laughing, joking, and eventually turned on to origami. We've loved Mark all these years, and in deference to his Irish heritage, I found a quote that was found on a tombstone in Dublin, and it said, "Death brings us heartache no one can heal. Love brings us memories no one can steal." That's Mark. In Manhattan and brought Lillian Oppenheimer with him. Lillian said to me one day, I like coming to your event. The children are always so well behaved. Well, why? They weren't running around because there was Mark right on the ground entertaining them. He would keep them entertained, laughing, joking, and eventually turned on to origami. We've loved Mark all these years, and in deference to his Irish heritage, I found a quote that was found on a tombstone in Dublin, and it said, "Death brings us heartache no one can heal. Love brings us memories no one can steal." That's Mark.
I am wearing earrings from Mark, and let me tell you a story about it. I used to go to Paper Shapers at Becky Berman's in New Jersey, and in October of 1992, I really wanted pink elephants, and my elephants weren't turning out well as a Montreux model. And I approached Mark and I said, "Would you make me some pink elephants?" He grumped and walked away. All right. Mid-November, I get a box in the mail. No notes, nothing, pink elephants. I don't see Mark again until New Year's Day, where Becky Berman used to have a big folding fest. And I go over to Mark and I go, "These are yours. What happened? You really expect a Kennedy to make an elephant in a presidential election year?" Clinton won, you get your elephants. He was wonderful and will be so missed. Thank you.
Hi. I first met Mark, I think it was the late 90s at PhilCon, which is a science fiction convention, and he was doing a little origami class, and I was just totally blown away by the models that were just so much cooler than cootie catchers and salt trays that I knew how to do. And he's like, "Well, you know, tomorrow we're having folding at my house in Allentown. Why don't you come? And I'm like, okay. So I mean, here he invited a total stranger to his house, and I went. And my son was very young at the time and not interested in folding, and he entertained my son, and he was just so awesome. And I never would have met all you people, and I'm so glad that Faye and Arlene are in my life, and it's just wonderful. And when he found out that I was into snails, he gave me one of his pins. It's a snail, and it wasn't popular, so he wasn't making them anymore, and I like gushed over it, and he went through all of his stuff, and he found one more that he had made. So I have the only two snails that I know exist from him, and he would bring me snail gifts, and he was just the sweetest person. And I've worn the snail quite a lot, and I've gotten comments on it. I wear it to non-origami things, and people are like, oh, that's so cool. So he's always with me.
For my son who sits here, but the real person that got me into origami are Mark and Arlene. When I came the first time, Mark immediately identified new people, and he dedicated himself as if nobody's there. I think the last time I met him was in his last time he came to the Force of the Mass. I don't remember if it was the last time or the one before one, but in that meeting I asked my physician to come to origami because his daughter likes origami. Mark was sitting with them, and he told the daughter, and I just was 2 days ago, I had an annual checkup, I see my physician, and what he asked me how Mark, from all the people that he had, he remembered Mark, he remembered how he told his daughter. So basically, Mark is so involved in my being in origami, and one thing I was communicating with Mark a lot through email, and before I even sent an email, immediately I found the information about the model I needed, a book I needed, where I can find. He was so informative and so given that I really appreciate and I miss him a lot. Thanks.
His granddaughters. And I first met Mark at Folding Wednesdays at Lillian's house in 1992. And he taught a model that I still have. And any model he made, it lasted. I have put one of his pins through the washing machine and it lasted. And I pulled it out. It was still on my pin. It was still on my shirt, and I've worn it since. And I feel like that his love, just like the quote that Rachel read, will last, because we look around and we see people and we look at his models, and he was just one of those people who just gave of himself so generously to each and every one of us. Thank you.
My name's Jenny Deitch. I first met Mark at OUSA convention in FIT, and my sister had talked me into coming. I wasn't very much into origami at that point, but after my first convention, I was hooked for life. But as soon as I got there was someone she said I had to meet, and she introduced me to her friend Mark, and I don't know, it was interesting. The first thing he started doing was telling jokes with my son James. James loved his corny jokes. Actually, all my kids loved his corny jokes and still do. My youngest Joe grew up calling Mark Uncle Mark. And when we referred to Uncle Mark, he always thought of Mark Kennedy first, and not my husband's actual brother Mark, which is another one, you remember? He just meant so much to all of us, and you know, in my family, he touched all of our lives, and I just have so many memories with him, just making my kids laugh. You know, one time we were at a convention, it was late, very late, like midnight, maybe, I don't know. My son did not want to stop folding, my son James, and he was like 11 maybe, and he was folding something with Yami, some origami toys, and so Mark said, "Oh, you want him to go to bed now?" I was like, "Yes, I really need to go to bed now." So he went over to James and threw him over his shoulder and carried him away from this crowd of people folding, and James was reaching to Yami yelling, "Origami!" We'll always miss him. He was a special person, and he's a special place in our hearts. And I'm just really glad I got to know him, got to know Arlene. They're really wonderful people.
When I went to Mark's house, I didn't really do origami, but I watched The Simpsons. And one time he came to me and said, "Do you want to watch anything else other than The Simpsons?" I'm like, "No." He also, when I was a little kid, he would say things, so I put a teddy bear right next to him, and everybody took pictures.
Hi, I'm Judy, Mark's sister-in-law. Arlene's my sister. And I just want to tell you that generosity that all of you through origami have experienced, sense of fun, entertaining of kids, extends to this family. Family reunions were, I just can't imagine the next family reunion without him. Bags and bags, when they would come, food would fill the car. My grandchildren always got wonderful little treats from him. I do remember years ago, Arlene, when you and Mark came to visit, we were finding little shreds of cut up paper under the couch and the cushions for months after that. But always in great fun, and I love him, and I'm feeling that from the very first time we met him, to the eating fire at their wedding, to the treats of food, to those origami pins that we all have, and everyone in the family has magnets on the refrigerator from Mark and Arlene. He's so missed and so loved.
Kathy Wallace. I just don't know if you've already seen it or not, but Michael Sanders, an origami guy in California, on his Facebook page did a memorial to Mark with a little video. He made an interview, and Mark is squeaking the children. So if you haven't seen it, it's Michael Sanders on Facebook, and it's really special.
Photos for mark.blogspot.com, and there are a lot of comments from all over.
Side of the family, science fiction family. I know Mark through LunaCon, PhilCon, the New York, Pennsylvania conventions. Whenever we would have a family, I remember, of course, the shared birthday parties with Raleigh. And when LunaCon fell over St. Patrick's Day, Mark was sure to wear orange. He wasn't one of those Kennedys that John was speaking about. Whenever we have a parish party and Mark would attend, he would, of course, go up and do some origami. And when he leave, we called it Kennedy droppings. All a dining room table there, a shelf there, a kitchen counter there. Other thing I shared with Mark was a love of what we called government work. The crude jokes, dirty cartoons, etc. that somehow we managed to distribute from office to office nationwide, and this is before the internet. So that was something else. Another side of Mark. Thank you.
Met Mark as an adult folder, and I really miss him as a resource. He's always, I don't have any much of access to get to the folding feed unless it's with friends driving over from New York often. And so I always loved his library. And the fact that one time I remember talking with him like late night because I was in his basement and I was staring at his books and we were talking about comics. as well as sci-fi stuff, because I always grew up loving graphic novels. And so I spoke with him. He spoke with me a lot about his experience talking about it. And as I remember going to the many conventions I've been recently attending, we always talk about the difference between origami conventions versus the sci-fi conventions. As well as, I don't know, I would miss seeing his voice on origami lists, Paper Dragon. And then it's such, his voice I could still remember talking about different aspects. And so I think as I'm planning a trip to Japan, I actually took his email. I was looking at Oldest one day to see about the different sites to go to. I pretty much saved his, I placed on my planning, on my itinerary, places of where he would recommend to go to. So I really thank the times and the generosity he has in talking about being a teacher and being a resource. I also would miss seeing him in folding Sundays, because one time he actually did ask me, what did I want to fold? And I'm always saying, I want to look at your books. And so that's always going to be a good memory. Okay.
Hi there, I'm Kathy Cooper, and I have Mark to thank for the best parts of my life. But I want to tell a story that's not going to make me cry. We used to go out to big dinners. Mark Blackman, Ira knows, we would go out in a big bunch of science fiction fans. And I remember one dinner, I just remembered it, where Mark put the entire tip in folded origami dollar bills, including the little rabbit that pops out of the hat, entire clothing from a hat to shirt to pants to shoes, the ring that showed George Washington, when you fold it right, had his face. And I was thinking to myself at the time, this poor waitress, she's gonna have to fight herself between, I must keep some of these, if not all of them, or actually like turn it into usable money. And I still wonder this day which choices she made. I still, what? Learn to fold the money. Well, that's another choice, but I always hoped that she had held on to it. Thanks.
I just want to pick up on that thought, Kathy. You don't know me, I'm Rona. I'm Arlene's college roommate, and Mark came into our family bearing gifts. But what I want to tell is I live in Delaware now, and we used to meet at a Chinese buffet at Plymouth meeting, and Mark always folded the tip, the dollar bills, into wonderful creatures. But when we met at this one Chinese buffet, periodically, all of the servers would come to the table. They would see Mark and immediately fight over who was going to take the table. So I think that lady probably kept her tip. And I know the servers at this Chinese buffet valued that and will miss it.
So I will say one thing. One time he actually brought one of the books with him, a money folding book, and they started going through the book saying, I want this one, I want that one.
Mark is special because he was always generous, inclusive, welcoming, and my kids are always beholden to having known Mark. And I will miss him, and you know, our lives are richer because of having known Mark and Arlene.
I'm Doug Kane. I've absolutely nothing prepared whatsoever, so I hope that'll help me to keep my long-windedness to a minimum. I honestly don't remember anymore whether Mark or I was the first to discover Lillian Oppenheimer. And how I discovered her is a story for another day, but there are so many people here talking about his contributions to origami. I thought a little bit more should be said about his amazing skills in the kitchen. As someone who can barely make his way through a package of ramen, I will always treasure his recipe for beef brisket in mandarin orange. I always hope that someday I'll be able to cook that well, and I probably never will at this point. It's too late for me. As for his convention going, I'm not as comfortable with conventions as I would like to be. I can count on one hand the number of science fiction conventions I've attended. And at least half of them are directly responsible because of Mark. I attended Lunacon one year. I actually found myself all the way down in Maryland because of Mark was able to drive me down there. And I got to meet some of the titans of science fiction, at least I regard them as titans, like Hal Clement, Isaac Asimov, Spider and Gene Robinson, whom I got to fold things for. But there was a science fiction convention in which Harry Harrison was the guest of honor, and the theme for that convention was his character, the stainless steel rat. I won't go into why he's called that. I'll just point out that Mark brought an extra supply of silver foil paper so that he could make origami rats that he would hand out. And one of them that he worked particularly carefully upon was signed by Harrison himself and put up for auction. And the reason I point this out is because Mark loved to tell of how excited this lady was to win the auction and run up to the front of the stage and collect her prize and turn to the audience with this crestfallen look. Hey, this is paper. To say that the Dragon Folder had a monumental impact on the East Coast science fiction convention scene would be a grave disservice. I don't know what else to say. Thank you.
My name is Cy Newman. I met Mark, I believe, at one of these folds, I believe. Can't be for sure, but it seemed I've known him forever but he's a great guy. We had in common a lot of things. One of them being science fiction, another being science itself, discussions. I first went to his home. I was invited by him and Arlene. And I used to spend a lot of time down in the basement looking at his books. He had an enormous library, and I always looked for things. And since I folded dolls, there wasn't a lot of dollar folding going on. But when I started coming on a regular basis to the third Saturday meeting, I would always have a book there. He would always have a book there with some dollar fold for me. If I had a question or something about how to do something, I just text him real quick or emailed him, and I got an answer back. Or if I was in person, I just gave it to him and said, hey, fix this, and he would fix it. But I eventually got out of the basement and joined the group upstairs. And through Mark, I met a lot of his friends, which are now friends of mine. Appreciate him for that. I appreciate him what he was. I'm not from a neighborhood where you can go poke your kid in the stomach and squeeze it. So I got a little nervous sometimes when he was doing that, when we'd go out for dinner and such. But it was fun, and I enjoyed his company, and I will miss him.
Every time I'd seen Mark, I'd buy a plethora of his pins, and my father actually sent him, Arlene, and a whole bunch of origami people on the board a picture of my pin collection. And he called him at home and told him, don't sell Giselle any more pins because she has 250 of them. I love the pins and I wear them all the time. It's just a job to take them off when you have to wash your clothes. But I love the pins, and every time I saw him I wanted to buy some, and I'm going to miss him greatly. He was like Santa Claus to me. God took a wonderful angel from us. Thank you.
Hi, I thought since both my parents talked, we might get the full set here. Maybe genetically, I was also somewhat of a socially awkward kid, And upon college interviews, I was very nervous, and I always remember that one fold. I'm not a very good origami person, but I could always do that one business card fog, and I could always end the interview with, and hey, can I have a business card? If you give me 2, I can make you a fog. And people were like, a fog? And then it jumped. I still do that fold, not so much for interviews, but if any child enters a business office and looks bored, I can get a fog for them, and I think that's kind of the best way to push on that thing of, here's small children, here's something that jumps and gets all over the place in the office. Create chaos, please.